Hi, this is Introduction to Counseling, and we're talking about Client-Centered Therapy by Carl Rogers, and this is part 2. First thing I want to talk about is the conditions for change that he set forth. In other words, what must the client perceive or do or feel or in some ways engage in the process in order to benefit from it. Okay? So the first thing is there has to be psychological contact between the counselor and the client. So a relationship has to exist and be developed and maintained for counseling to work. And that's because, he thought, we need to have an impact on each other because this is a relationship. It's one-sided in that you're not considering your problems or your issues and you're not talking about you, but there has to be contact. So there has to be a good contact. Usually there is, but sometimes there may be impediments to that for a variety of reasons. Next, there has to be an incongruence in the client. So they have to be in a state of vulnerability psychologically. There has to be a difference between the way they see themselves and their experiences versus what the experiences actually are and who they actually are. And so people, he thought, developed anxiety and depression and so on as a result of this incongruence. Okay? Now, they may not be aware of it. They may not be aware of their incongruence, but they will be. They might not be aware of their vulnerability, but they will be. Okay? So incongruence is required. Now, there also has to be, on the part of the therapist, congruence and genuineness. So therapists are aware of themselves at all levels, thinking, feeling, and so on. And they actually have to be aware of their reaction to clients. And they have to be open to understanding their own experiences in addition to those of the client. And further, they have to offer the client unconditional positive regard and acceptance. They don't judge. They accept the client for where they are and who they are. Doesn't mean they agree with what they do or how they think or whatever. But this caring, this acceptance, comes with a warmth, a kindness, yes? The next thing that the client has to experience is the empathy of the counselor. This is where the techniques come in directly. So you, the therapist, he said, have to leave your world behind you as much as you can because your focus is on the client. Now, it's not possible, he said, to be value-free, and so you got to monitor your own values and feelings and try to understand how they may clash with the client. But caring and warmth is expressed even though you have differences. Now, the client has to be not only offering empathy and acceptance and unconditional positive regard, the client has to perceive that. Okay? So the way you show these things as a counselor is through things like the nonverbal kinds of behaviors, like leaning forward a bit and paying close attention and looking at them when they talk. Having an open posture, not a closed posture. The tone of your voice should be kind. And so you become a part of the client's perception of reality, that a relationship like this is possible, and here's what a good one looks like. So what does the client experience in counseling? Well, they experience their own responsibility to make their own changes. They experience the therapist. They experience what the exploration of themselves looks like and how to go about doing that. Yeah. They experience change. And lastly, they experience themselves in a new and different way. Sound good? Okay. So what are the techniques of empathy? Well, empathy involves demonstrating using reflections or restatements of content and of emotion, and staying with their frame of reference no matter what change it undergoes. Okay, that's number one. Second is being congruent yourself. That helps them with their empathy. Offering unconditional positive regard, one more time, which helps with empathy. And which helps them experience, without the roadblocks usually in place in many relationships and conversations, that you actually care about them. It frees them up. And developing and maintaining a trusting relationship. All of those are techniques, many of which have to do with empathy. Empathy is the ability to accurately perceive the internal frame of reference of another person. And that's Rogers. He said that in the late 50s. I will tell you that I have explained empathy beyond this one part to include also the possibility that you're having feelings that mirror the client's or another person's emotional state, which I call a second part of or stage or component of empathy, which I call immediate empathy. Some people call it experiential empathy. So empathy means trying to see the world from the other person's perspective and trying to understand it, the meaning that the things in their world, their subjective world, have. And imagining what it would be like to be that person, you see? And then communicating that back to the client. That's where the accurate empathy comes from. That's where the reflections of content and emotion come in, you see. So he said that we have to be able to be real with people, be concrete, so we don't want to get off into the esoteric world and the non-concrete world where we actually operate day to day. We operate in a concrete world. Yes, the meanings and so on are the other parts, the non-concrete world. So it means being real. It means being concrete. It means being honest, without hiding behind being an expert. An X is a has-been, and a spurt is a drip under pressure. Offering unconditional positive regard means non-judgmentalness and warmth and acceptance. We accept them as a fellow human being without having preconceived notions and without making assumptions. Okay? Now, the process of counseling involves things like goal setting. So we want to structure the sessions. We're going to meet at this time for this length of time, and so on. Okay, and we're going to work on your goals. What are your goals? And I'm going to communicate this non-judgmental warmth and real genuineness for you as we go through this process. And then we're going to work on your goals. So it isn't what some people have thought, and that is and this is incorrect, of course, that you just sit and reflect over and over again, day after day, hour after hour. No, that's not it. No. We don't want to be pushy with clients. You don't want to tell them what to do. So instead of saying, you really ought to calm down, you've been crying for half an hour. I've got 20 other patients to see. Come on, buddy. That's horrible, of course. Dramatically horrible. No, you say, it's okay, take your time. When you're ready to talk, we'll talk some more. See? This is all Rogers stuff, right? You don't want to guess or interpret or assume. I think your father wanted to die as he had absolutely no reason to go on living. That's a horrible thing to say. You're psychologizing from an armchair when you do that. You're making assumptions, not a good idea. You could say, it sounds like it's really difficult to know the real reasons for your father's death. See the difference? And then you want to attend. You want to pay close attention. You know, you're not preoccupied with your own thoughts. If you have thoughts coming through, just let them go through. Don't grab onto them and massage them. Like a ticker tape, just let them go through. Right? Okay. What are some of the overall goals in this kind of therapy? Well, becoming more self-directed. We want them to become more self-directed. These are overall goals. These are not specific goals. We want them to think better in a more positive direction towards themselves. increasingly. And we want them to pick what their goals are. Now, what was good and what was not so good about this? There were contributions and things that people didn't like. What were the contributions? Well, the relationship is key. Far different than in other forms of therapy up until that time. Perhaps this is the most relationship-oriented one, except for perhaps existential therapy. You're using yourself in the therapy. That was a huge contribution. It is relatively easy to learn the core skills like reflection. There are other skills. That's the main one in his view. Another contribution is the client does the work. We don't do the work. The client does. And finally, all therapies start with this and use the skills from time to time. So cognitive behavioral therapists use these skills of reflection and summary and so forth, summarizing. They use them all the time. Yeah. I think psychoanalysis is probably the only one that doesn't, I would guess. Maybe behavior therapy doesn't quite as much. Now, criticism, some people say, oh, it's too simple. Something that's simple can't be effective. I challenge that. It's difficult to measure effectiveness. It's difficult to measure effectiveness in any kind of therapy, and this one is a little more difficult because you have a smaller range of techniques, and the techniques are limited. Clients aren't challenged as much. So a form of therapy like Gestalt is very challenging, at least in its original form. It's less so in more modern forms, but still challenging. And it's true, clients are not challenged, but you'd be surprised at how challenged clients feel when you present who they are as people to themselves. You'd be surprised. And that the last one is that not all therapists are warm and fuzzy. Well, that's true. And if you're not a warm and fuzzy person, this may not be the best therapy choice for you. Okay. I like Carl Rogers personally. I learned Carl Rogers' techniques when I was trained to do crisis counseling. I liked him so much that when he died, I wrote his obituary in a local paper, and wish I could have met him. I missed out on that barely. I wished I had. You can see a lot of his films on YouTube. See ya. Bye.